The simple question that was asked, we think you ought to answer it, but apparently you're afraid to tell us.
The gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The institution of slavery is America's greatest sin. The enslavement of more than 4 million human beings between 1619 and 1865 nearly destroyed our nation, and its impact continues to be felt to this day. These effects remain because slavery and discrimination were enshrined in our founding documents, in the courts, and in our elected leadership. The Constitution of the United States, which established and guided our democratic system of government, counted African slaves held in bondage as only 3/5 of a human being. The Supreme Court furthered this dehumanization in Dred Scott versus Sanford, which declared the protections of the Constitution did not apply to African Americans, regardless of whether they were enslaved or free. At least 12 of the first 18 presidents of the United States owned slaves at some period in their lives. It took civil war and the near destruction of the United States to end the practice of slavery, but even that did not bring full freedom to those who were enslaved. For decades thereafter, African Americans endured forced segregation, racial violence, and denial of voting rights, and some of that continues today. Throughout the 20th century, federal government programs that helped build the middle class purposely excluded African Americans, further institutionalizing segregation and discrimination. In 1934, the Federal Housing Administration was established under the New Deal to create housing opportunities for middle and middle class families. The agency, however, refused to insure mortgages in black neighborhoods, a practice known as redlining, for the color codes used on maps to indicate areas it was, quote, safe to insure mortgages. The FHA also subsidized the construction of white neighborhoods and required that the homes that were built not be sold to black families. During World War II, many African Americans joined the military with the belief that their service would be honored when they returned home from fighting for their country. The GI Bill was transformative in providing tuition assistance, job training, and unemployment benefits to service members returning home from Europe and the Pacific, and it played a significant role in building the middle class in post-war America. The law was drafted, however, in a manner which allowed states to control the distribution of veterans' benefits, resulting in black veterans in segregated cities and states being denied the benefits of the GI Bill. Unemployment benefits were provided on the GI Bill for returning service members searching for new jobs at home. African Americans who had learned advanced job skills in the military were often only offered low-wage, low-skilled jobs when they returned home. When these highly skilled workers refused these low-wage jobs, they were denied unemployment benefits for refusing the only jobs offered to them. When the interstate highway system was built in the 1950s, it connected the country and revolutionized the nation's economy, similar to the railroad system in the 19th century. Many of the highways, however, were built in the middle of black neighborhoods, with many black-owned homes being taken over by the government through eminent domain. And in addition, black communities were often further segregated when highways were built along racial zoning lines, creating physical barriers between white and black neighborhoods. A full right of American citizenship only came after decades of struggle by those who carried on the civil rights movement and risked their own safety in search of an end to racial discrimination. And we should recall our beloved late colleague, John Lewis. Despite this, our country still lives with the lingering effects of slavery and official racism that has harmed African Americans. Since the 1960s, the wealth gap between black and white households has more than doubled. According to the Washington Post, the most recent data available shows that it would take the combined net worth of more than 11 black households to equal the net worth of one average white American household. Last year, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention released a study that showed infant mortality rates in the U.S. had broadly declined, but they remained twice as high for black infants as they did for white infants. In our education system, school districts that serve predominantly black and brown populations receive nearly $23 billion less in funding than predominantly white school districts. These disparities will never be fully addressed until we're able to acknowledge the great historic wrong committed against African Americans. H.R. 40 provides acknowledgement that a grave sin was committed against black Americans, a stain on the soul of America. This commission will be empowered to recommend ways in which we as a nation can address these wrongs and ultimately make amends for them. This can include a number of different approaches, such as community investments, improving delivery of healthcare, and strengthening housing and educational opportunities. I want to acknowledge the great work on this legislation by our colleagues on this committee, particularly Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee for her leadership. And I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of the commission to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans Act. I encourage all my colleagues to support this bill, to help our country heal and do what is right. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Goldman, is recognized for an amendment.
Yes, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 40, offered by Mr. Gomer of Texas. On page 9, after line 23, insert the following and
The amendment will
redesignate.
be considered as read.
Well, I
Gentleman
would
is
ask that it
recognized
be
for
read.
Pardon?
I'd ask that it be read. I object to the waiving of the reading.
Gentleman objects. The amendment should be read.
On page 9, after line 23, insert the following and redesignate all that follows accordingly. G, when the Democratic Party should be responsible